Welcome back, attractive and well-educated watchers, to, well, it's a new episode of this series, certainly, but it's a bit different than usual. You see, throughout the planning process for our trip to Trajan's Rome Part 4, we came to the conclusion that 120 to 130 CE is probably the biggest decade yet for major technological, societal, and agricultural innovation. Not only have we been spending over 2 decades fast-tracking Roman society into the modern era across any metric we can find, but we've been absolutely smashing onto the scene with major administrative and cultural updates alongside a frankly mind-boggling amount of major agricultural and culinary introductions that the Roman populace has no doubt been struggling to keep up with. An entire generation has been raised into this new way of thinking, an entire tenure of agrillegion women to travel out to the Americas and to make friends and allies with the natives. Some populations of animals have had over 50 generations in the care of our dedicated zoologists and geneticists, with some experiments having never before been even imagined in our own timeline. To say nothing of how we are finally getting into the electrical age, beyond which technology boomed around the world in a heartbeat compared to the last 10,000 years of human development. At some point, the total notes for the episode were getting so lofty and extensive that we were facing the reality of 7 or 8 hours ahead of straight script reading, and that was not something we thought was terribly pleasant to face down, nor did we think you guys would sit around for that long. Long, immersive, detailed scenarios you voted for, sure, but a 7-hour-long slog through the various minutiae of societal shifts in classical Rome? Maybe we need to take it easy and split that up, or at least wait until we have some more, subscribers. So instead, we've opted to make our trip to Trajan's Rome episode 4 into a 3-part series, each of which will be over an hour and a half long, and will ultimately be concurrent with each other. First things first, the driver of society, the plants and animals of Rome. Next, we'll cover the technological and administrative advancements of this decade year by year, and finally, in the third video of this series, we'll cover the developments of society and geopolitics, all those wars and generals everyone loves to hear about. So, before we get into the plants and animals, we want to push out a quick disclaimer. This is not realistic. It is entirely possible. And you can believe us, we've been going through exhaustive and at times infuriating, to others, study on the topic. We are a real-life farmer, and we specialize in particularly wild experiments and genetic ideas for other animals. But nobody should think that this sort of progress that we're working on could be facilitated with anything less than a federal system at your back. Like with so many factors of science, all of this progress would be entirely possible with the full support of the US government, phenomenally large founder populations, a dedicated team of potentially thousands of overseers and supervisors who are absolutely broken for genetics and love their jobs, backed by functionally unlimited funding, and directed by a PhD-level repository of instructors on how and what to track. Everything in this series would be possible with the benefit of unified governmental support, just like we have in this series. But Joe Schmo Farmer in the real world, slogging down here in the mud with the pigs like the rest of us, well, when we get down here, that is entirely hypothetical. The crux of this situation is that all of this stuff we're doing in our trip to Trajan's Rome is only possible because Trajan is our best friend, and because we were already rich as balls, by the standards of the Roman Empire, when we first came in. The concept of a shipping company or a private zoo for people to visit at leisure, breeding experiments, or holding entirely wild animals for later use, they were all present at the time. We had those concepts. We just never had anyone that leveraged all of those factors together to their advantage at any amount of scale. Just as with so much of alternate history, much of this could have been done 2,000 years ago if everyone had just gotten their heads out of their asses and started working together toward a single united goal that would ultimately benefit the entirety of society. Moreover, this particular stage of the scenario is going to be laid out in 2 parts as well. the animals, and then the plants. The latter part of which will include, of course, the food. The plants are fairly straightforward and have a much smaller portion of the script, but it's still going to be a lot. In stark contrast, the animals and their byproducts, traits, and effects on Roman society will become all but absolute throughout the course of this video. Most importantly, animals are not something you make instant progress with. Some mutate faster, some have smaller or larger populations, and others are extremely difficult to breed and handle in captivity, while otherwise being fairly chill and cooperative in their natural habitats. For this reason, this will not be an exhaustive breakdown of animals that we have domesticated over the course of our stay in the 2nd century, but rather the really important ones that we've dictated will be a direct benefit to our personal goals with this scenario. It will be dependent on the amount of generations we've gotten with an animal since our arrival, and we will list out the traits and such that we are breeding for as they come up. Next, because animals make progress over generations, not lifetimes, we'll be establishing a hard year limit for the amount of progress that we've made in this video. That year will be 125 CE, and you'll find out why in part 3 of this section of the scenario. That being said, we will still cover animal-based inventions and developments as years go by, from 120 CE to 130 CE. We will also have other stuff in the next videos. And finally, sorry, we know we're just dragging this out, we need to talk about a basic concept we have coined the genetic ratchet. So there's this thing called regression to the mean. When you breed two geniuses, their offspring tend to be more average despite their parentage. Through the last 2.5 decades of trait monitoring, we've found ways of using artificial insemination, spreadsheets, careful observation, and advantageous selection to eliminate regression to the mean entirely in our primary test subject populations. The less fantastical specimens are culled or sold, or otherwise are found some other way of life, while only the truly tippy top of the A-list remain to pass on their genes. Traits are specifically isolated, found in the large founder populations that we have gathered, and mixed up with other beneficial traits, all to be bred in from various angles. Subpar specimens that are capped are then put through more rounds of aggressive breeding and selection via artificial insemination and wild outbreeding to begin the selection cycle over again, while the top 1% moves forward as the crown jewel of any specific program. Loss of progress through various processes that we've developed through trial and error over the years is now a thing of the past thanks to the average Roman animal breeder being able to keep better track of beneficial mutations and maintain them in the overwhelming population over the years. All of this is thanks to a focus on cultivating the genetic racket, a process that raises the genetic floor while simultaneously working to outright eliminate any genetic ceilings we run across. Furthermore, this effect is deeply studied, recorded, and replicated at every stage, with every respective advancement in the field marked down and incorporated into the overarching curriculum for that field. So, let's start from the top down. We will be covering the animals in descending order of how many generations we've gotten with them, aka their total generational interval. Wanna bet what we're looking at first? Rabbits! Having over 80 generations with an animal really helps make big change over time. As a rabbit farmer in real life, we've actually directed evolution in our own populations, making lines smaller or larger, different colors, and different behaviors in just a few short years. Rabbits breed very fast and make a lot of babies that themselves grow up quite quickly and ultimately breed tenaciously thereafter. Moreover, the European rabbit, though undomesticated at this point, was commonly kept in private warrens by Roman aristocrats to stay fresh and alive until their keepers wanted to eat them. Proper domestication would not come until much later, but at the end of the day, the infrastructure was already there to get 10,000 rabbits on the first week after we arrive in the Roman Empire. From there, we've blossomed the business with the agri-legionnaires into a multi-billion member system constantly cycling out the worst and keeping only the best. Artificial insemination, invented literally in our first year after arriving, alongside modern understanding of genetics and a founder population in the tens of millions, has allowed us to speedrun all of the unfortunate trial and error of aggressive breeding practices of yesteryear. Only the largest, healthiest, fastest growing, and most fecund of rabbits meet the cut, with the rest of the rabbits being tagged and released back into the wild with little brass circlets or ear clips so they aren't recaptured for testing. Only allowing the most peaceable rabbits of this selection population ensures that nobody has actually been bitten by a domestic rabbit in the last 70 generations. Then, from the most recent 30 generations or so, we've added increased selection criteria to choose for elongated and intensified oxytocin loops. Simply put, when these rabbits look at a human, it makes their brains produce chemicals that make them happy. This, by the way, is why humans and dogs love each other so much. Over the course of tens of thousands of years, we've selected for dogs that feel good around humans and who act accordingly. With understanding of modern genetics, a discerning breeder, and the introduction of a little glass tube that splorts the semen of an ideal specimen into another ideal specimen, we can engineer the same thing in basically any other animal. While this sort of hyper-aggressive selection can often lead to serious setbacks for other aspects of the animal, we have been all too serious in selecting only the healthiest and hardiest for the program, encouraging a zero-inbreeding doctrine, and cultivating multi-trait lines that can be braided back and forth with each other over successive generations. To say nothing of a near-constant catch and release program taking in wild rabbits, sometimes of other species entirely, that lets us gradually increase the width and depth of the gene pool overall. And that sort of selection has made the Roman rabbit, Lepus titanus, into a monster. Averaging at 60 pounds, over twice the weight of the largest suspected specimens of Neurolagus rex, the largest lagomorph to ever live, these Labrador Retriever-sized lops are over 20 times heavier than their progenitor species. They've become so large now that they can no longer breed with the European rabbit due to the small size of their parent species, and instead must have such wild DNA literally injected into them via rudimentary turkey baster. Like a Chihuahua trying to take on a Great Dane, huh? But the change has not stopped there. Lepus titanus is not just a big, tasty, fast-growing, and near-mindless food source for the average legionnaire. It is a fertilizer factory whose poop has a considerably higher nitrogen volume than even the gardener's gold of their forebears. And each rabbit gets up to half size in just 3 months, by which time they are all ready to start pumping out litter upon litter of up to 20 kits at a time in just 25 days. Those kits have open eyes in 3 days and are covered in shaggy fur, nearly cold-proof, by the end of their first week, eating solid grass by their 3rd week in this world. To improve their chances of survival, and relying on their human caretakers, Lepus titanus no longer leaves their over a dozen babies in covered nests, but instead has been chosen from females who attend directly to their babies, and stay positioned over them most of the time. Though the first generations were a bit of a mixed bag, now the gigantic lagomorphs use their stubby front legs as a sort of rudimentary support system to keep them from squishing their young, reinforced by generations of selection that chooses rabbits whose legs can settle into place like a perching chicken, or whose Dunlaps are so large and fuzzy that they can be positioned over the litter as a sort of blanket. Not only do these kits stay warmer and thus survive better in colder climates, their parents sometimes have as many as 18 nipples, providing ample milk for all of the young that they spit out every month after reaching sexual maturity. Most importantly, the urge to eat their young has been aggressively worked out of them, allowing for them to be consistently bred the very next day after giving birth, with no danger of either father or mother deciding that they don't want to take care of their old kids in the meantime. These rabbits also live, on average, up to 15 years, over twice the average expected age of death for domestic rabbit breeds today, which means that a single female rabbit can produce as many as 3,500 offspring in a single average lifetime. Assuming you kill every one of those babies after 8 months at 60 pounds, with up to 65% of its live weight as edible biomass, not including the bone meal and organ meat for the dogs and pigs, a single pair of Lepus titanus will net you a grand total of 140,400 pounds of rabbit meat throughout their lifetime. At about 800 calories a pound for that meat and a 1 million calorie a year diet, a single pair of Lepus titanus punches out enough meat to feed 112 people for a year. Or, 7 people per year over the course of its lifetime. That is a medieval family right there. That's right. Get yourself a pair of Roman rabbits and breed an entire larder of meat for your family to grow big and strong. They just eat grass, and they can't help but wander up to humans and roll over for belly rubs whenever they see you. They're as big as a dog, so they're hard to lose, and they no longer run fast enough to outrun a canny human child and her friends. Oh, and this is sorta embarrassing to admit as a rabbit farmer, but bunnies are stupid. They aren't the stupidest animals that we've ever had the pleasure of working with, but goodness gracious, are they certainly in the top 3 for mammal stupidity. One thing we've noticed rather consistently is how little of a social survival instinct they have. If you take 6 rabbits and... Oh, sorry. Warnings here, triggering and stuff like that. If you take 6 rabbits and line them up on the tailgate of your truck for butchering day, bash the brains out of one guy at the end, the other 5 rabbits do not care. They'll go over to him, sniff him, satisfy themselves as to the nature of his deadness, and move on without a single thought in the world. Sure, they are indeed social animals. They live in gigantic warrens. But a mother does not care about her young. They don't make lasting friendships and mourn the passing of their bros. They have so few thoughts in their tiny-ass brains that they never consider that they might be the next one. We have done this hundreds of times. That is not an embellishment. It amazes us every single time how little survival instinct these things can be made to have. And that's going to be even more the case for Lepus titanus. If you take a military-grade shotgun and turn one of these guys inside out in front of 100 of his friends, not a single one is gonna give a shit. They'll look, process the incident, and continue on chewing the grass wherever they're laying. They'll bounce right up to you, count out Frank, because they hated him anyway, and beg for food from this warm tube in your hand. No longer, after all, do they need a survival instinct, and do not need to burrow protective sites and run away from canines, felines, and birds, as they have long since been genetically programmed by human hands to recognize these figures as their caretakers. We'll get to those later. And as we've just gotten a few dehydrators and started making rabbit jerky, we can guarantee you from experience that it is easy, fun, and delicious to store their meat for the long term after drying it out. To say nothing of how adorable they are. Look at her face, so chubby and silly. Okay, so hear us out on this one. The chickens are not exciting. We have no desire to make them smarter. We do have a desire, however, to make them modern. The Roman chicken probably produced about 50 or so of what we would consider medium or even small eggs per year during the 2nd century. They also were fairly small, though nothing like the bantams we think of today when we think of pet chickens. And they were sort of flighty and assholey and went out of their way to lay eggs where it was difficult to get them. I mean, they still do that, but they're way worse at it now than they were at it back then. However, over the course of around 54 generations, we will produce the Cascadian Red. This is a large, dual-purpose bird that lays 250 large eggs per year on average and has a moderately dedicated parenting strategy with a very strong adoption reflex and fairly sex-independent brooding instinct. All of this together isn't super special by modern standards, actually. There are much more productive birds, larger birds, even birds who go broody more often and hatch more babies with greater consistency than the Cascadian Red. But the Cascadian Red pulls ahead for us in that it has been specially bred over 54 generations for its roosters to be as protective and inclined toward adopting any random chick they see just as much as any hen of the same breed. This trait is not unknown in the modern chicken, but it's a rarer one that is more difficult to find throughout entire uniform populations. Such parental management traits, you see, are not as necessary in the modern day of electric incubators and giant heat-lit brooding displays like you see at farm stores and the like. Using the large labor pool afforded to us by the state, and more modern tagging and bookkeeping methods, we can find and isolate all roosters in the Empire who have been verified to sit eggs and mother chicks. Once bred, only those of their offspring who do the same will be spared the stew pot, and so forth. Over time, this has led to an incredibly paternal and responsible breed of chicken that is more inclined to parent than to fuck around, even if it is only a fair to middling chicken across most Masterex compared to the higher performing breeds of the modern day. What's the point, you might ask? Well, we'll be dumping out literally millions of baby chickens every month across the Empire as a whole, and they will need to go somewhere. If we breed a specific class of chicken that is obsessively compelled to adopt any baby it sees, rooster or hen, we can start dumping these stupid cheapers out the very day after hatching and only be limited by the amount of feathery wings that can cover them. With this, time and labor to tend to them is drastically reduced for our worker population, and the growing period is largely streamlined thanks to the established pastures and overproducing agroforestry plots that can support the extra mouths during the main season. So we gotta say, we're not much of a cat person. We don't like cats. We've lived with too many cats, and there are perilously few cats we actively seek affection with. Cats are overblown, hyper-arrogant, ego-bloated biological motor noise machines that don't do anything for anyone in this day and age. Now, back in the Roman Empire, it was generally concluded by the average person that the felines of the day had to work for their keep, and so were not fed, but rather were made to tend to their own hungers on the pests of the land on their own. Moreover, the Romans decided at one point that cats were only sorta okay at this job to begin with, and invented the ferret to do their job instead. Case in point, cats just kind of suck. They just aren't great. Our own farm cat has not been fed by us, by any humans, for months, and we couldn't help but notice that the moment we stopped feeding him was the moment the mice on the farm all started disappearing in droves, and he gained 10 pounds. Funny, that. And during the medieval era, well, score one for Christianity for once, because cats back then were doing housework, land management, playing music, and praying to God, if the pictures are to be believed. For once, the cat was not lazing about or merely scavenging the feed stores, but actively working, respectable and humble, pious and productive, just like any good dog. For a brief moment in time, the might of Christianity guilted and shamed the cats out of their profligate ways. But sadly, the knowledge of how the people of yesteryear did this has since been forgotten, just like so many valuable secrets of history, and the cats have returned to their shameless profligacy once again. But that's fine. We'll get there eventually. But for now, we must stick with what we will affectionately call Project Rimworld, after the game that gave us the idea in the first place. You see, we've lived with cats most of our life. It's one of the reasons we don't like them. So we know some things about cats. Number one thing we know about cats. This isn't a thought, this is not an opinion, this is fact, this is knowledge. Number one, cats are stupid. This is not throwing shade at your cat, Karen. And it's not saying that cats in general are not perfectly sculpted killing machines literally evolved to destroy anything under 3 pounds. They are exactly that. But they're also stupid. Their eyes are so gigantic that there is barely any room in their skull for a real thought. and what of their brain they do have is almost entirely dedicated to the mathematics of leaping at something from roughly 2 feet away and killing it without being able to see it because their eyes are so big that they can't focus on anything within 1 feet of their face, which is terribly awkward considering that there's something that kills with their face. We need them to actually be useful. So that stupidity is going to be a main feature of breeding them over the course of around 40, admittedly pretty fast generations by 125 CE, to become housekeeper cats. Because number 2, big fact that we know about cats, cats are pretty fastidious. They are persnickety things that like their surroundings and bodies clean. Or, at least their definition of clean. This is not a conscious effort on the cat's part either. Cats, much like beavers, really cannot help themselves. Not for the same reasons, but it can certainly be said that felines have their own format of OCD hardwired into the very software of their system. So we're going to use that. We're going to breed for that OCD. We want cats that, despite being gradually more patient and accepting of environmental difficulties, will be unable to stop straightening things, dusting off surfaces, clearing floor space of its area, and pushing unattended objects into little piles in the corner. To make this even more effective, we will leverage cat fact that we know, number 3. Cats can have thumbs. Some cats actually can have several more thumbs than we have. And polydactyly can be selected for. Over the course of dozens of generations, we've managed to breed, inseminate, and select only for the cats that fit the former criteria, who have the most mobile and opposable thumbs. Now, the 40-pound housekeeper cat can grip a broom, wet a washcloth, open and close doors, and otherwise carry out the most basic tasks that a classic maid might if trained appropriately. And it cannot help itself. This isn't to say that your housekeeper cat will start sweeping things up from day one. That, like with dogs, requires extensive training. But they will be categorically unable to live in an environment that is conventionally untidy, and will do just about everything they can to bring it to order, at least as far as their stupid little cat minds can fathom. A poorly trained housekeeper cat, we can only imagine, is an absolute nightmare, because they consistently pick up random objects lying around and carry them into hidden locations that they have chosen as a storage place. Despite this, the housekeeper cat is near limitlessly patient, and endures the constant untidying of its environment without complaint, merely tirelessly maintaining its unending vigil through its crippling, artificially selected obsessive-compulsive disorder. Once again, you cannot rely on this cat to clean your house untrained. Without extensive involvement by their master and conditioning to the environment it's made to live in, these cats will quickly become dog-sized nuisances that only serve to take whatever shit you put down the moment it hits the table. But, well trained and cared for, these cats can be manipulated into doing many of the chores that the old guard of Romans might have used slaves for just 30 years ago. Now we enter into a field of animals that don't change much. Or at least they don't change enough for us to have art of them or a massive section about them. That should, however, make things go smoothly at least. Long story short, Roman sheep, just as with so many livestock from the Roman era, were much smaller and less productive than sheep today. To update the model requires only dedicated attention and genetic supervision for the 27 generations we've had them. And kablam! Quality 90s Nickelodeon entertainment. You got a sheep that advertises around 200 pounds, produces 10 pounds of wool a year, produces a gallon of milk a day, and flocks around 300% larger than its contemporaries. This might not seem that big to a modern person, but like with the chicken, this is absolutely going to overcharge the meat and milk production industries of the empire. Bam, baby! While sheep and pigs only have about as much time as each other, a short 27 years, the porcine build is a much more flexible and productive one that can be made to make a lot more progress in much shorter amounts of time than other hooved critters. We want to make a pig that shoots out larger litters which survive more consistently. We want a pig to be, 1,000 pounds on average, be far more affectionate to humans than its ancestors, and we want to eliminate porcine stress syndrome essentially entirely, allowing for these hogs not only to feel comfortable in larger, more tightly knit groups, but also establishing a herd mentality among them that helps them be driven by dogs and other livestock more easily. With an average of around 18 to 20 babies per litter, up to 26 nipples, and only a 6-month growth period, these floppy-eared bulldozers eat huge amounts of crop waste from the agralegions to provide everyone in Rome with what they considered to be the highest standard of meat: pork, prized among the Roman aristocracy because it is the only animal that does not produce a secondary product like cattle and sheep do. With this, we get the Trajanic hog, a monster of reproduction that easily rivals the production power of the now extinct classical era's long barrel Meishan pig. Nowadays, the long barrel Meishan might be extinct, but the short and medium barrel breeds still exist, and you can look them up online. They're very silly looking. The Roman Empire's pigs will be every bit their Western counterpart. Oh yeah, and every pig is marked and tagged at birth and hunted down the moment they get free, because if these things get into the wild, they will overthrow the entire ecosystem in, no time at all. We're not joking. A single population of feral hogs, today in real life, requires over 66% of their population to be killed in any given year just to avoid growing. These pigs, if allowed to go feral, will need well over 90% of their population culled every year just to keep them under control. But of course, the agralegions have established a free catch program that encourages Romans to just kill any feral hog they see out in the wild. Like with Oregonians here in the modern-day Pacific Northwest, killing a feral hog is just considered your environmental duty to the state. Fire away, no tags needed, take it back home, and eat it at your leisure, and thanks for doing your part to keep our agroforests free from dangerous invasive livestock species. Ho ho ho, baby! This is what we've been excited about. Right alongside the elephant bird and the rabbit, Darwin's bark spider has been at the very center of our plans since we arrived in the past. With the strongest biological fiber known to science and a single-year breeding cycle that works like clockwork, we have taken the entire island of Madagascar and turned it into our own exotic animal domestication factory. We've got 22 generations of these things, more than enough to take advantage of the Belyaev effect, also known as domestication syndrome. You see, unlike any of the other animals on this list, we are not breeding Darwin's bark spider for size or eggs or whatever. We only care about 3 basic factors. 1. Survivability of reproduction. B. Sociability in groups. And 3rd, spider silk production and strength. These things can be green, black, brown, and purple with pink polka dots and 16 eyes. We do not give a single solitary fuck. All we care about is that they have a lot of babies that consistently survive to adulthood, they make a lot of high-quality silk, even for them, and that they don't kill each other. The most serious hurdle, we assure you. Darwin's bark spider is incredibly territorial in real life, and they have gigantic webs all to themselves, which are generally suspended over the width of entire rivers, up to 30 square feet of web, to catch dozens of prey items at the same time. Naturally, they sort of like these webs to themselves, going out of their way to travel well beyond the boundaries of their own territories to kill competitors, and the process of gradually domesticating them for sociability over the last 22 years would have been a Herculean endeavor by the best insect obsessives in the empire. And the results are astounding! While the average specimen from the wild produces 15 milligrams of silk per day, an imperial bark spider can produce up to 100 milligrams a day. And that silk is consistently around 4 times as tough as its wild counterpart, surviving up to 6.4 gigapascals before breaking. This doesn't make it the strongest material around. It's still only an 11th or 12th the toughness of diamond, for example. But it's considerably tougher than steel, capable of proofing armor in this era against essentially any assault laid against it, if given an appropriate background. Well-fed, highly socialized members of the latest generations can tolerate up to 4,000 individuals in a cultivated Roman canal zone, specially carved out for their needs by classic hydroengineering. Madagascar has 375,706,240 acres of land. So let's set aside exactly 1% of this land for these spiders. At this concentration, 3,757,062 acres will comfortably hold 15,028,248,000 spiders in total, producing roughly 1,502,824,800,000 milligrams of silk per day. Let's assume each of these spiders is, however, only milked once in a year. So we'll only get that much total silk throughout the course of a single year. We'll say 124 CE for, no reason. By themselves, a single person could never hope to do all this. But 5 million people, each milking 3,000 spiders over the course of the year is considerably more reasonable, only around 8 or 9 spiders a day. Such spiders can be milked with a bicycle tire, as shown on a YouTube video where a dude went to Madagascar and made a guitar string out of spider silk. It's fairly easy and not terribly stressful to the spiders, who can then be released immediately thereafter back into the wild, or in this case, into their enclosures. These spiders then go back to their webs and are given nutrient-rich bug mash to keep them happy and highly producing. That still produces 1,502,824.8 kilograms of silk in a single year, assuming each spider is only milked just once. That's 1,656.58 US tons of silk, more than enough to armor the entirety of the army when we consider that only a few pounds of this stuff would be required to armor a single person. If we assume that a single kilogram is needed to laminate the armor of one soldier, we could easily still armor over 1 million people. Not believing that? That's cool. Double the amount of silk used, and we can still armor 750,000 legionnaires for the incoming war. As established in the previous episodes via the reference to Malagasy silk, it is entirely possible to make a single sheet of Bessemer steel on a dude's chest entirely bulletproof by the standards of a common round in the modern day. But bark spider silk is considerably better for the job, 4 times stronger than its silk moth counterpart, so we only need a fraction of the spider silk to produce modern bulletproofing. And of course, this is all considering literally just 1 day of milking for each spider per year. In actuality, a small but statistically significant fraction of the agrilegions will always be breeding, selecting, caring for, milking, and releasing these spiders to be ever more sociable, productive, and fecund. No joke, probably about 5 million people by the time we get around 125 CE. That's 2% of the entire fucking empire, by the way. That's like 1% of the entire world at that time, really. But in exchange, death rates in the military absolutely bottom out. Combat injuries are easy to recover from due to how shallow they are when they do hit, and volunteer rates to become a legionnaire, not even including the pipeline of young men joining from the agri-legions, absolutely skyrocket. It's safer and more profitable than ever to join the military, and the administrative offices of the empire probably can't get enough paper to keep everything recorded, which they will promptly and immediately report to the Imperial Revenue Service so that inventories may be properly monitored and demand may be met where it arises. And, remember that this literally most conservative estimate we have for silk production is the most conservative estimate we have for silk production. We can't stress enough that this is literally just every spider being milked once in its entire lifetime, and we do this every year. So spider silk isn't just the stock and trade of the imperial armor. It's beginning to become the rich man's favorite cloth, and even the poor are starting to get some choice articles, like silky underwear for her comfort and enjoyment. Get your girl a pair of spider silk panties, gents. She'll show her appreciation by taking them off. Insert a Victoria's Secret commercial or whatever here. You know where we're going at. Much like sheep and chickens in the earlier portion of the video, goats have not changed much beyond their modern counterparts in the 18 short generations we've had with them. Even so, there are some changes. Naturally, this is not terribly impressive for modern breeds, but outstrips the Roman analogs by leaps and bounds. An easygoing breed, this new Roman goat punches out as many as 6 liters of milk a day, or 1.58 gallons for those of you using a measurement system that won 2 world wars, put boots on the moon, and holds the future of the world in their hands. And, for the sake of production, these goats explicitly have multiple sets of horns which Romans gleefully use for crafting stuff after slaughter. Not much, but it is way better than what we arrived to. Now, to alternate to something far more important. Dogs! Dogs, 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 dogs! So we're not gonna lie to ya. We've been incredibly serious about advancing the gradual uplift of dogs. We love dogs. We know nobody knew that by this stage of the scenario, that we love dogs, but we love dogs. With the introduction of germanium crystal transistors, it has been possible since the advent of electrification to set up talk boards for dogs and help them learn to speak better. Yay! Furthermore, since the very beginning, we've been buying up the smartest, most multi-talented, and healthiest dogs with the widest possible gene pools available, and of course, all descended directly, at the end of the day, from 2 of our own dogs that we brought from the future. There were, without a doubt, millions of dogs to choose from in the early 2nd century, and we've gone out of our way for the past 27 years to select only the very best. The best of the best. Of the best, have gone on to protect the Emperor himself, while those who don't make the cut still go to the legions. And of course, we don't cull dogs in our operation, we're not a fucking monster. So the ones that can't make the cut even as legion hounds end up being sold to the public, to appreciative owners who we know will start slowly circulating them around to the lower classes over time. Xenophon talked in Senegeticus about how a good sportsman must have many dogs, a tracker, a striker, a herder, a guard, etc. At the time, the average dog was alleged to only be able to learn a maximum of 10 commands, maybe 12 for the very best. But the dogs we breed can master dozens, maintaining a major advantage over downtime dogs, and being worth a lot on the open market to a very select few special people who we know will be good to them. By using artificial insemination to incorporate the very best genes, we've made a flexible, all-weather hybrid dog that performs nearly at the top tier of modern dogs. And they're smart. Smarter than modern dogs by far. The average legion hound, if given a soundboard and training, can use it to learn up to 100 words and has largely mastered the idea of if-then reasoning. Already, there are certain pieces of equipment in development that we call hawking devices, which will eventually help such animals speak with even greater vocabularies, which are trained into them from birth with special handlers. And the Imperial Hounds are far smarter even than that. After 13 generations, we have mastered the genetic ratchet rather explicitly on dogs, pioneering so many of the selection programs on them with the largest population of breeders and handlers, thanks to the synonymous nature of dogs already in the Roman society. This means that dogs, of all the animals we've fucked around with, have made the most progress generation by generation, to say nothing of how they'd already been worked on for tens of thousands of years. With the power of artificial insemination, technological vocabulary assistance, and modern imported genetics, the Imperial Hound puts our own dogs to shame in the modern day, because we've never selected for appearance, for fashion, for fad, but for intelligence, health, empathy, utility, and vocabulary. Thousands of canines are passed up before even being considered for testing, and only the top 1% simultaneously across all metrics ever get the chance to move forward into the selection process, with only a few thousand dogs acceptable for the role of Imperial Hounds after even that selection process. Only about 100 of them have bred new offspring that themselves pass all of the tests. And even the failures of this top tier enter into higher standard breeding programs than any modern kennel club would bother with today. These dogs have sharper eyes, keener noses, better impulse control, higher patience, bigger brains, and greater average capacity to learn and process commands than almost any modern companion. And each and every one of them is no less than 150 pounds at 2 years old, sculpted from the widest gene pool imaginable, and trained to perfection. Their broad, mastiff-like bodies provide a powerful template for the double coat and big mane of our original cold-weather dogs brought from the future. Their wide, powerful jaws complement the strong necks of modern guardian breeds, which allow them to wave their victims around like flags in the protection of their charges. And the incredibly flexible, tactically inclined mind of the border collie, nearing the practical brain power of a human 10-year-old after so many generations of aggressive selection, synergizes well with the springy muscle genes of the native Laconian hound and the raw endurance of the husky. Their feet are broad and have multiple dew claws for all-terrain access, with their fur blowing off or shagging up as the heat demands, lightening considerably in the cold and darkening noticeably in warmer weather. Though these animals are absolutely phenomenal even when compared to their modern counterparts, it takes a lot of food to maintain them, as the metabolic cost of such an extremely generalized breed that also performs so highly across all metrics is truly immense. To maintain their incredible brains alongside their massive bodies and extremely high-functioning stop-and-go metabolism, the average Imperial Hound requires... well, let's just put it in comparison in terms the average dog owner might understand. Moon Girl, during her puppyhood when she was growing like a weed, would suck down 4 cups of large breed puppy formula every single day, and when she became an adult, it became 3 cups of large breed adult kibble every day. The Imperial and Legion hounds consume twice that as adults, and their young might hork down 3 times what Moon Girl ate as a puppy. Think 6 cups a day as an adult and 12 cups a day as a puppy. That's up to 1.5 pounds of kibble every day after ending the maximum consumption puppy stage. For reference, the average human might consume 3 to 5 pounds of food every day, and we have a worldwide fucking obesity epidemic right now. And while the average person's diet back then was probably higher in calories, it was quite a bit less nutritively. Though Legionnaires might have gotten as much as 5,000 calories a day, we're talking about the average person, and that means these dogs eat just under half as much as a human, and a much more nutritionally dense diet at that. Though we are fortunate that dogs were molded by human hands to eat our garbage, so most of these animals get their kibble made from scraps, and less yummy bits typically regarded as less edible to humans. The very best of the Imperial Hounds have brains and bodies that are so energy demanding that the state simply regards them as humans with special dietary requirements. Which is good, because the boundary between personhood and non-personhood is starting to get extremely fuzzy with them and a few select other animals. They can manage the vocabulary of a 4-year-old, push around the brain of a 10-year-old, and function in society like a grown adult if trained appropriately. They can do extremely rudimentary math, act as couriers, identify and memorize specific landmarks by name, identify themselves in a mirror, deliver messages to specific people, and otherwise manage themselves almost entirely independent of their handlers for extended periods of time. And some of them even have pets and companion animals of their own, much like the select few parrots who have their own goldfish in real life. No longer is the average Roman encouraged to consider dogs as random tools for everyday life, but as fellow people to be respected and rewarded for their labors. And they aren't the only animals we're looking to uplift into personhood. But first... we're going to let everyone know something. You know, in case you hadn't figured it out yet. We love ostriches. We love emus and ostriches and elephant birds and moa. We love cassowaries and rheas and all those big, silly, giant birds. We can't get enough of them. The bigger and sillier the bird, the better. We just think they're fucking neat. We can't help ourselves. Rome, in the meantime, already had a fuck ton of ostriches. They weren't domesticating them, but they were gathering up by the literal tens of thousands for spectacle and consumption. The place was just swimming in ostriches. Romans just had ostriches everywhere, just out their nostrils, dude. Now, Modern domestication of ostriches took, well, in 1865, there were 80 domestic ostriches in the Cape Colony of South Africa. In 1875, there were 32,000. In 1913, that number had skyrocketed to over 776,000 worldwide. Now, ostrich is a global industry. We had an ostrich farm just down the road there for a bit. Like we want our own emus, but we actually, there was an ostrich farm just a couple of years ago that closed down just a few miles down the road. You can buy ostrich at some specialty meat stores. You can find it, man. Ostriches seem to be so easy to domesticate that they're starting to be more attracted to humans than their own kind. So you better believe that we've made more progress than that. We've got the entirety of Africa to choose from, artificial insemination, and a pre-existing infrastructure to constantly track every single trait and variable in every individual over a founder population in the millions that we don't even have to get from the wild. They're already there in the empire, just ready to buy. That being said, we're not looking to do much with ostriches. We have 3 primary concerns alongside the standard domestication: eggs, size, and feathers. The feather market in the Victorian era was exactly what started ostrich domestication in the first place, with huge demand for quills and accessory bits for hats and clothing and the like. Very fashionable, you see. Though, over the course of 14 generations or so, we've been able to breed ostriches to have longer, more colorful plumage, much like a peacock, neck ruffs, and feather frows, not unlike the Polish chicken. They lay 100 eggs a year on average, which isn't unheard of in their undomesticated counterparts, but it's definitely well over twice the average. It's the highest end of possibility for undomesticated ostriches. Finally, through some basic breeding, we've managed to get a thicker-legged, larger specimen that gives a bit more meat and hide for the purpose of Roman use. However, since an ostrich can live up to 75 years old in captivity, it's most likely that most female birds will simply be kept alive throughout the course of a human lifetime, to be used for their amazing egg production, of course. So, little known fact, cheetahs have been used as companions and hunting animals for thousands of years. In nature, the cheetah does not see a human as prey, and indeed, sometimes approaches humans to escape the attention of larger predators. Lions, you see, do not attack humans unless they are desperate, for example, so cheetahs know that they are safe around humans. In general, the cheetah is sort of the failure of big cats, not even a panther, but a feline. They were so bodied by the other big cats of Africa, already a high competition place as is, that they had to spec into daytime life to avoid competition. Meanwhile, the Romans and Egyptians saw quite a lot of utility in this general failure at being a cat. They operate and sleep during the same hours as humans, they have an incredible acceleration and top speed, hunt a lot of the same things that humans at the time found to be the highest skill of game, and work really well with dogs. In fact, cheetahs in captivity tend to get so neurotic and high-stressed that they need dogs to calm them down. Moreover, the cheetah is remarkably intelligent for a cat. Not only do they understand symbiosis as a method of self-preservation, as established above, but they are surprisingly social in the wild. Throughout our own lifetime, we've seen the amount of cheetahs forming coalitions increase dramatically. And female coalitions have started to form in the modern day, which has never been seen before our own personal lifetime. And cheetah coalitions aren't like lion prides, with a single primary hunter that does 95% of the work. They use their small size and flexible figures to slink around their prey, surrounding it from all directions before carrying on simultaneous attacks from 90-degree angles. This hunting strategy has become so successful for them that they've started to move up to ostriches and other very large prey that can easily kill a lone cheetah. So they easily understand team strats and use them highly effectively in nature. They're like the feline version of the dog. They got that dog in them. And that's exactly what we're going to push them toward. In 13 generations, we've made them bigger, broader, healthier, heavier, stronger, and more durable. They lack the raw 70-mile-an-hour speed of their ancestors due to their greater size. However, they can maintain a blistering 60 miles an hour for over 5 minutes at a time, over 10 times the duration of their wild progenitors, and more than enough time for a pair of hounds to close the distance and take the rest of the kill. These oddly splotched muscle cats are also masters of talk button boards with germanium crystal transistors. While they consistently lag behind the dogs, their personhood is slowly coming over the horizon, and showing that it's only a matter of time until they start forming proper sentences and carrying out simple conversations in the style of a 3-year-old. And the amount of commands that they can master is very much along the same lines as dogs that Xenophon was talking about in Synergeticus, with 10 or 15 solid separate commands that a well-trained cheetah will consistently be able to manage. It's especially relevant that they're always hanging out with dogs, learning directly from them and gradually coming to identify themselves as the same group, even if they speak with different chirps and yips rather than growls and barks. Dogs might, at this point in our trip to Trajan's Rome, start thinking of cheetahs as lithe, fast-moving dogs, and cheetahs might think of dogs as very large, slow-moving, heavy cheetahs. And the symbiosis will continue alongside humanity for as long as we can keep it going. This is no longer training and utilization in hunting trips. It's a co-evolving domestication experiment which will induce obligate symbiosis between two animals and create a power duo the likes of which the natural world would have never have expected. As it takes 6 to 10 generations for the belly of effect to really take hold of a population, you can also imagine that cheetah bites against humans, while already basically non-existent in normal circumstances, are even less common now. It won't be long at this rate until cheetahs catch up with their canine friends and start to join the ranks of the legitimately pre-sapient. Unfortunately, we'll need to wait for the next major development in technology to help them join that hallowed club. And that will have to wait until the latter half of this video, or perhaps even the next video entirely. Okay, look at this thing, dog. You can't be telling us that you would just leave it alone. We can't even do that in real life. Humans can't help themselves, and the noble capybara is one of the chillest things in the known universe. They allegedly taste good, travel well, are easily trained, and don't cause too much trouble when provided a good environment. They are low energy, high adorability, and infinitely memeable. You just roll over and pet one in the wild. They don't care, honest. They can bite, for the record, and they tend to have ticks, but of course we'd have to deal with this in any animal population we domesticated. We are not asking for much. So after only around 10 generations of domestication, as we only got their program started around 110 CE, we've still essentially removed all of the negative traits above. No ticks thanks to, cleaning them, of course, and no biting because 10 generations is perfect to secure the belly of effect. If it bites, it doesn't breed. We just want them big and silly and edible. Instead, we either tag and release back into the wild for the sake of maintaining the founder population and monitoring the environment, or biters are fattened up and eaten because, as mentioned before, a lot of people eat these things. They produce fairly large amounts of fertilizer in the form of manure, but otherwise, we're just making these guys calm, fat, and tasty. However, the next article on our list is, well, we're doing a lot more with them. You're gonna have to follow along with us here. Please, hold our hand and follow along, okay? So ravens and crows are both part of the same genus, and they have the same amount of chromosomes. They don't tend to hybridize much because they sort of live in different environments without terribly much overlap, but it is known to happen. Most hybrids are infertile, but we guess around 15% of the males and around 25% of hybrid females can produce offspring. Those fertile offspring can then breed with each other to start new, independent populations. Wild ravens and crows can be bred after this initial founding event to add more genetic diversity in the form of new fertile hybrids. If we capture roughly 2 million of each bird and carry out an artificial insemination program, with each clutch averaging around 5 eggs apiece, we can hypothetically engineer an entirely new species with a functional starter population of around 10 million individuals, of which about 2 million individuals in total will be fertile. And 2 million individuals is more than sufficient for a successful breeding population, especially with extreme human supervision that we're going with. Dunbar's number was left behind a long time ago. These hybrids are called cravens. From there, this million-strong founder population can be gradually stewarded with artificial insemination, careful selection methods, and fairly exhaustive training standards in infantry toward more gregarious, intelligent, human-friendly, and talkative descendants. Those who know more words, can master tests faster, can carry on conversations longer, have better impulse control, and in general can act more human with each passing generation, will be bred with each other to aggressively uplift the species toward functional personhood. Already, the best crows can master just over 100 human words in real life. Compare this to the best dogs, who can only master around 50 words on their button boards. But this incoming 10th generation of cravens, hatching out as of 125 CE, are mastering up to 2,500 words, carrying on basic conversations, and otherwise being about as talkative as human 5-year-olds, with a much wider understood vocabulary on top of that. They are intelligent enough to eavesdrop on enemies and listen to their conversations so as to relay them back to their human handlers, and they regularly ask personal questions like, "What color am I? Where do I come from? Where are we going? And why are we not the same?" If a craven is sent to do reconnaissance, it will return not with a few choice words, but rather a report of the enemy and its movements. Big group of enemies in yellow and red, several thousand moving east on horses, 3 days' ride, 100 bows, thousands of spears, hundreds of swords, long wagon column. These cravens also crave human affection, whereas their parent species do not, relating to humans better than their wild counterparts, understanding human emotions, and otherwise seeing themselves as little humans just as the imperial cheetah sees itself as a speedy doggo. While it is perhaps likely to see them occasionally squawking and cawing at people as ravens and crows do, especially when out on mission, back home they speak to each other in human babble, usually modern English. They are raised from children to call for mama and dada instead of squawking for their mothers and fathers. And their parents, raised under these same conditions, reinforce the lifelong human cultural conditioning. They calm children with noises of there, don't cry, instead of chirps and chitters. And at least at first, we shouldn't think of this as something that they do on purpose. This was what their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, human grandparents, once did, and it simply carried down the line. Now, human tradition has entirely taken over, and human speech is more natural to the craven than their ancestral tongues. Don't think this is possible? We got sorry news for you, because crows and ravens are the first animal here on this list that we can make the claim are just smarter than humans. Across certain metrics, of course. Humans are certainly the most intelligent of the higher order animals in the world across all metrics. Our total average is much better, and we have a much more broad and diverse intelligence than any of the other very intelligent animals out there. But certain factors of our intelligence can and often are beaten, and easily at that. Elephants, for example, are known to have far superior long-term memories to humans, and both ravens and crows appear to be in a similar boat, though through a different fashion of memory than the pachyderms. Specifically, the corvid capacity for memorization and dissemination of highly detailed visual information seems to far surpass nearly any animal we know of, including humans. Multiple experiments have been done by corvid researchers with basic city crows, wherein actors in plastic masks have captured, stressed, and otherwise fucked with them before releasing them unharmed back into the wild of their city homeland. Up to 9 generations later, long after the original crows of the experiment had died, their descendants could pick out the same mask in a big city crowd and single it out, scolding, swooping, pooping on, and even directly assaulting whoever wore that mask. We can't say specifically how, but through their own intelligence and method of speaking, corvids have learned to cultivate a much stronger, more detailed, and far more accurate oral culture than humanity has ever gotten close to. Moreover, ravens and crows have been recorded many times as understanding and even having a practical grasp of game theory. Crows have been seen in Lhasa going back as much as 200 years, playing rudimentary ball games with each other. using dignified teams, rule sets, referees, and awards of extra food for the victors above and beyond the standard consolation prizes one receives simply for playing. While this was all caused by interaction with Buddhist monks and developed over perhaps decades of slow symbiotic play alongside humans, these were not domesticated animals. They just came in every day to take food from humans and play their games in the courtyards of the various monasteries and palaces of the time, just as us humans do when we have an overabundance of resources and are eating well. And communities of both ravens and crows can grow to be just as large as any tight-knit human community, with some crow communities in large cities around the world growing up to tens of thousands of members, with each individual crow knowing as many as 1,000 of those members personally, more than most humans can manage in their own day-to-day lives. Many real-life zoologists and ornithologists have publicly been seen calling crows and ravens little feathery humans, or things very much like that. And their similar behavior, intelligence, and society to us has been noted by human observers across numerous cultures for thousands of years. So while we get a lot fewer generations to toy around with them, the craven is one of the most aggressive and probably most successful of our domestication programs because we're not domesticating things so much as we're uplifting them. They already have complex societies, dignified oral tradition, the ability to mimic human speech, long memories, problem-solving brains, and a close relationship with humans for thousands of years. We are not asking much of them, merely for them to keep getting smarter, friendlier, more social, more talkative, more human. And that's the sort of thing that both ravens and crows already kind of love doing. But what does this real-deal hybrid look like? Well, it doesn't look like a crow and a raven that were splattered together, something that we had to explain to Lazpav when he asked what parts of the craven look like a crow and which look like a raven. Sadly, this is hybridization, not chimerization. We are focusing on hybrid vigor for this, also known as heterosis. You see, when the gene pool widens, things get different. Sometimes really different. With a wider and more solid selection of genetic material, and without certain size inhibitor genes that would be passed down by having single species parentage, some hybrids can get proper gigantic, bigger than both parents, sometimes combined. Properly selected and bred for purpose by intelligent caretakers, subpar specimens are weeded out and the best of the best are let to pass through the filter. Those who didn't make the cut are poured into continuing breeding programs to build up the best traits that didn't quite make it. Those who are entirely unsuitable for further involvement in the program, like the infertile or the atavistic, are sold to civilian owners who will pay handsomely for some of the smartest, most novel of corvid pets, ones who can master hundreds of words and carry on mock conversations that will keep the aristocrats amused long into the night without ever truly reaching the level we need them to. Suitably, thanks to 10 generations of aggressive selection and artificial insemination to produce a literal new species from wild ravens and crows, the craven is a new beast entirely. It stands 2.5 feet tall, occasionally reaching up to 10 pounds, though somewhere between 6 and 8 is far more common, and with a wingspan that sometimes reaches up to 7 feet. Combined with a more muscular build, slightly more forward-facing eyes than their parent species, and a wicked hook at the end of their beak that's been selected for and built upon from its raven ancestry, the craven has a silhouette a bit more similar to an eagle than a standard corvid. And it's made all the difference. They can soar for hours on end, and get generally better straight look at the object of their attention than other passerines, with more dexterous feet selected for grabbing things better, and being used more often in manipulation. White tips to their wings and white chest have recently appeared thanks to the piebaldism typical of extensive aggressive breeding, though the common Roman thinks this is quite an attractive feature. And their craniums are gigantic. Not only has the craven needed to grow to support a bigger intelligence, but its actual skull has needed to expand to make room for yet more neurons at ever denser saturations. To keep up with human expectations, the top million birds or so by 125 CE will have truly gigantic brains compared to their body size, and a near constant need to use them, thanks to the perpetual presence of Roman society egging them on, all but begging them to learn even one more word, to master even one more test, to get that much closer to true sapience. And much as they don't really understand it, they're not alone. They've got competition. So, Romans had access to parrots. Not all of the parrots in the world, of course, no macaws from the Americas over there, and no cockatoos from Australia, naturally. Though a recent mosaic discovered in Italy might well challenge this. But they had tons of parakeets and parrots from India, North Africa, the Middle East, and even might have gotten their hands on some specimens from Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Or at least they would have been able to, as Roman influence stretched ever so barely out that far. There's no textual evidence to support the presence of the African grey in Roman society, but our first test runs on Roman maritime technology would have absolutely taken people that far, even before our true age of sail ships made their way from Roman ports in 103 CE. In fact, it's entirely possible that particularly advantageous traders seeking to make progress in the sub-Saharan tribes might have gotten that far or managed to pick up some African greys and brought them back to Europe by our entry date. And Augusto Donum had a lot of African stuff going through it on the regs, so we may have had access to the African grey already. Meanwhile, we'll have started domesticating macaws by 110 CE, and probably could even find a way to reach all the way across the Indian Ocean to convince some very faraway traders, indirectly, to collect us some cockatoos by the same date. Why we think this? Well, Romans had access to the Maluku Islands and the Banda Islands, at least indirectly. This is where cloves and nutmeg came from, so we'd be able to send out orders for cockatoos, also from the Maluku Islands. And eventually get them back in, well, a few years, probably. Don't underestimate the power of Roman shipping, though. They had actual shipping companies that specialized in animal care and transportation back then. Remarkably like we have today, in fact, run by councils of investors who pooled their money together to start a larger, more fruitful enterprise than could otherwise be maintained individually. These were real-deal conglomerates, and while animal transportation companies are not known by direct sources to have made their trip as far as Southeast Asia, glass companies were. Where's the proof? Well, Romans did the glass industry in a funny way. They didn't ship out individual glassworks that often because they had invented the art of glassblowing, and were known worldwide for it, with some Roman works having been found in China and even as far as Korea and Japan, though such works were almost certainly hot-potatoed up the chain. So instead of bringing holds full of glass jars and bottles, plates and panes, they'd bring giant glass blocks in their holds, sometimes tons heavy. Then, once they got to the port where they wanted to do business, they'd chip off what they needed and blow the glass on site. Alternatively, they'd have big chests full of large glass beads that could travel easily and would survive the trip in a crate without shattering. These beads could then be melted down and reblown wherever they arrived. Glass blowing on site would not only guarantee quality wares in the Roman style that had no chance of breaking before they got to their point of sale, it also no doubt provided spectacle for Rome's trade partners. Come, see this art that only the Romans know. Watch as they blow molten glass into artful shapes and figures. Throw your money at them. Talk about all of the wonders that the Roman Empire knows, which no other land can reproduce. This was literally revolutionary, and Rome, during the time of Trajan, was going through a sort of big glass boom, wherein new techniques and new ways of shipping and forming glass were going crazy, while the rest of the world was just sort of stagnating around with their cast glass. Let it never be forgotten that the Roman Empire was the first nation to use glass as a standard thing for windows, at least among the upper classes, of course. Because of this skill specialty, we can be confident that where these giant blocks of Roman glass are found, the Roman Empire had direct contact. People at the time could not just pass these giant blocks of glass or crates of beads around without understanding the Roman secret of glass blowing. So Roman artisans would have had to actually be there to make something new from these raw chunks. This is a major way to find out just how far Romans, or any other society, reached. And we've got huge evidence for direct Roman trade in the form of these chunky glass blocks all the way out to southern Vietnam. That's only 700 miles from the nearest cockatoo, the red-vented cockatoo on the island of Palawan in the Philippines. And considering that the Kingdom of Funan in southern Vietnam at the time already had extensive trade with the Philippines and Borneo, it's functionally impossible that the people there don't know about the cockatoo. In fact, that area was a roaring cosmopolitan trade zone at the time. It's functionally impossible that they haven't brought some to the mainland for the sake of trading them to rich people. 'Twas the style at the time, as everyone here should know by now. So while it's definitely a bit of a stretch, we're going to say that it's entirely likely that some Roman-born glassmakers have laid eyes directly on a cockatoo. If we went back in time and showed them a picture, they would go, "Oh yeah, I saw one of those things over beyond India. Oh yeah, they taught them to talk, and they had these crests that go up. Beautiful things." And that means we can buy them. After all, Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire famously had a cockatoo, long before the Europeans ever discovered Australia. It's very realistic that we would find a way to get them shipped all the way to the Roman Empire by 110 CE, alongside the macaws we'll get from the Americas. While parrots can consistently learn more words than ravens and crows, they also have smaller social structures, less patience for actual conversations, fewer play mechanisms, a smaller diversity of potential sounds they make, and a much smaller selection of hypothetical play activities that they perform in the wild. They also consistently perform worse at direct intelligence and problem-solving tests. That being said, they're much more expressive, musically inclined, they visibly dance more, are more inclined toward mimicry, and seem to have more powerful bonding instincts. Certainly not little feathery humans, but absolutely on the list for direct personhood and uplift. The parrots of the Roman Empire are simultaneously easier to train on the short term and harder to handle on the long term. Less orderly, but also more human-like in their reactions to external stimulus, less methodical and directly useful while still very emotional and inclined toward group activity with humans. Cravens use their intelligence for serious business meetings, but the parrots of the Empire tend to use their intelligence to be chaotic nutjobs that remind us all of the importance of going goblin mode from time to time and really enjoying one's life. With what seems to be a 3-year sweet spot for breeding turnover, just like with the Cravens, the African Grey is coming into its 10th generation, larger, smarter, and more sociable than any before. Every parrot brought into the domestication program is slowly competing in step with the Cravens of the Empire, always measured against each other and providing the next big step to leapfrog over. Parrot and Craven trainers smugly stand across from each other, with self-important smirks upon their lips as their birds do the talking, bad-mouthing each other and claiming to be the best. This, of course, is just a game to everyone involved. All understand how fantastical it is to live in a world where such birds are not only commonplace, but can carry on somewhat reasonable conversations with them. All that aside, even the African Grey is probably not visually much different than its ancestors, while the other birds have only had around 5 generations of domestication to start reaching belly of effect territory. They don't normally bite, at least, and they know a lot of words, more than any corvid, though they aren't particularly as good at consistently using them as their Craven counterparts. Even so, great successes on the Uplift program in only a short 2.5 decades or so. After all of that cool shit, this is going to be underwhelming, to be honest. Cattle were already pretty good back then, actually. The Chianina cow, still around today, was considered a large, faithful, and productive working animal, and the idea of making specialized breeds was not unknown to the Romans, though their capacity to exercise that idea was much less refined than our own. And we're not looking to make cattle into people, so obviously, after 9 generations of work, we can't do too much change, but we can use modern selection practices, artificial insemination, and, well, you know by now. That sort of progress can still get us a cow that produces up to 20 liters a day by 125 CE. That's 5.28 gallons, putting normal Roman cattle to absolute shame. And fine marble patterns in their meat are becoming fairly commonplace in good-eating beef throughout the empire, as new herds are released from the imperial core and spread throughout Roman territory. Is this particularly impressive by modern standards? Good gods, no! Holstein Friesians can get up to 12 gallons a day, though 9 gallons is more common, and one Girolando from Brazil once pumped out over 32 gallons in a single day, to say nothing of how common high saturation marbling is in this day and age. But compared to the paltry, not even a full gallon that Roman cattle would have produced back in the day, this is serious milking business. So much so that we'll be inventing the pulsator milking machine in this decade specifically to keep up with the production. Deer are a funny thing here. Before you ask, we cannot combine most of them together into a hybrid super deer. No Elka rain moose in the future of the Roman Empire. Sadly. But elk riding, reindeer riding, and even moose riding are not out of the question. Elk, reindeer, and moose are already farmed in the real world, and reindeer have been herded and farmed for thousands of years. In fact, the secrets are already present in Trajan's Rome, as we took all of Scandinavia in the last decade and incorporated the Sami and other reindeer herders of the northeastern Europe and Scandinavia along with it. Through pre-existing Roman infrastructure and the traditional herding practices of the Sami, we've not only been capturing and captive breeding the three biggest and best-known cervines nearly the entire time, but we've also gone out of our way not to destroy an indigenous culture, but rather expand it. They've already done all the trial and error for us. We need them. So our only real goals are what the Sami have been doing for forever. At least mostly. We want deer, reindeer, and elk that are bigger, calmer, carry more, are more social, and make more milk that flows for longer and is easier to squeeze out by human hands. Might seem like a lot when we list it out, but when you think about it practically, it's pretty easy-peasy stuff that's fairly common and standard in basic domestication practices, even all the way back then. And by 125 CE, after about 9 generations in play across all species, we can probably have them as follows. This is going to be a little clinical here, so, keep up. Moose get over a ton, that's 22 to 2,400 pounds, and produce up to 2.5 gallons of milk a day at 12% fat content. Elk get up to 1,200 pounds and produce up to 3 gallons of milk a day at 10% fat content. Reindeer get up to 700 pounds and produce up to 1 gallon a day of milk at 22% fat content. This is nice, but it's not enough. You see, we've always had a personal fascination with antlers. And while it's all well and good to have a rideable animal that we can take to war, which has fuck-all gigantic Impale-A-Man spike racks coming out of its damned head, we can do better. Those racks only stick around for part of the year, and only males get them except in reindeer, and we need them to be around as often as possible, and on every specimen. This won't be too hard, mind you. Elk and moose have antlers in some form up to 10 months of the year, by selecting for faster growing, faster shedding, and shorter periods between shedding and regrowth, fairly simple standards alongside the whole size, health, strength, yada yada, we have engineered deer, moose, and reindeer that grow and shed twice a year, possessing racks essentially all year long in the process. And whenever possible, female elk and moose who happen to have one genetic condition or another that manifests in antler growth will also be bred specifically for those traits. A significant portion of domestic elk and moose in Trajan's Rome by 125 CE have antlers all year round and throughout both males and females, just like reindeer. Moreover, certain hormone conditions in males of all three of these various groups are known to produce persistent lactation periods in males. We will isolate these conditions and help them responsibly proliferate throughout the populations, producing a regularly lactating bull that makes around half as much as the females to bolster milk production. Fun fact, these sort of conditions don't only exist in deer, they also exist in human males. However, this comes at a cost. The metabolic requirements of such a trait are rather extreme, something that could only be realistically maintained in a domestic environment. But because we have so much surplus, over 1.5 billion people worth of calories from agroforests planted in 110 CE alone, we have long since solved the food problem. Appropriate overproduction feeds any sort of beasts, and cervines are no exception. The standardization of kibble for all manner of animals across the empire also guarantees an easy-to-transport, long-lasting, and often fairly light and space-efficient feed that can be appropriately rehydrated on-site for these mighty steeds. And fascinatingly, this is not one of those things where only the best of the best are getting them. Quite the contrary. This particular domestication program is being carried out not only by the state, but sponsored heavily through the enrichment of entire culture groups alongside the encouragement and expansion of their native traditions. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of deer-herding indigenous Northern Europeans are being eagerly and excitingly integrated into the Empire because we are amazed by their ability to tame the beasts of the North, to ride them wherever they will, and to live their life around these majestic creatures. Now that Rome has them within its borders, it will gleefully adapt and perfect the process practiced by these humble but noble people for maybe over 1,000 years, even at that point. Raccoons are one of our favorite animals, but of course that is not why they are on the list of bestest animals ever. Raccoons are deviously intelligent, moderately social, fairly friendly to humans, about as trainable as a dog, and have adorable little hands! Oh my god, look at those things! Don't you just want to hold one? Despite being the menace of all poultry farmers, and no friend to rabbit farmers either, raccoons are one of the very best critters in the New World for direct uplift. There's just a problem. Despite the fact that we will undoubtedly have millions of raccoons to choose from once we get people in North America, we're told by some at least moderately reliable sources that raccoons actually have a fairly low independent mutation rate. This means that with every generation of raccoons that passes, we'll have fewer raccoons with novel traits than raccoons who, well, don't have novel traits. More proportionately, at least, than other animals we'll be dealing with here. Raccoons get bigger and smaller, they get a touch fuzzier or a bit shorter furred, they get a bit better or worse at climbing, but by and large, raccoons apparently stay the same from generation to generation, more so than many other animals. And why would they have any reason to change, of course? They've already shown that they need little to no adaptation to become absolute menaces to garbage cans everywhere, born with the undomesticated intelligence to force humans into inventing entirely new containment methods just to give them stuff to practice their pilfering upon. Indeed, everything the raccoon does best is what we're going to breed them for. Intelligence, problem-solving skills, pattern recognition, language, and social skills with button boards, and all that typical human stuff. More flexible little hands, also. Opposable thumbs, stronger grips, better range of motion, you get the drill. These are not horribly difficult tasks, mind you, but we imagine with only 8 generations of raccoon breeding, even with artificial insemination and the entirety of the North American continent's native population, we're probably only getting to friendly, well-trained raccoons of above average but not unbelievable intelligence by 125 CE. That's fine. We're patient, and we do love raccoons. We were very serious in our second video to save the most massive bird to ever live. The largest species of elephant bird is not only a fantastic potential source of eggs and meat if farmed, but a creature that weighs as much as a draft horse on elephantine pillar legs that stands 8 feet tall at the shoulder. The obvious potential as a mount for human riders slaps one in the face with even a few seconds of thought on the subject. Having never experienced anything close to a true predator, with the biggest threats on Madagascar being the giant fossa at 60 pounds and the Malagasy crowned eagle at only 15 pounds, this thing would not find humans to be threats. After all, they would outweigh even these biggest of predators on the island by 3/4 of a ton easy. Chances are that they would be a fairly placid and might even be approachable, though obviously one must always be careful with a wild animal the weight of a draft horse. After 7 generations of aggressive selective breeding and artificial insemination, we've managed to get these bad boys up to over a ton in weight on average across both sexes, and got the egg count up to 20 eggs per year if maintained on a high nutrient food slurry, each of which represents roughly 150 large modern chicken eggs. They stand 12 feet tall and have slightly more flexible legs than their ancestors, which they can be commanded to kick forth with lethal efficiency despite their otherwise friendly nature. Those same legs can carry a human rider at a steady pace of around 25 miles an hour for up to 8 hours at a time, or at a more moderate 20-mile-an-hour trot for up to 12 hours at a time. Slower than a good horse, but with far more endurance and range, so long as they're provided no shortage of feed immediately after the trip. Special harnesses are used to ride these beasts that allow the rider to tug at the bird's winglets to force it to turn, while leaning forward or backward motivates the animal to speed up or slow down to maintain balance with its rider like some sort of biological segue. Though not enough time yet has passed to put it to the test, the imperial Titan bird is suspected to have an expected lifespan of something around 70 to 80 years, if their relatives in the ostrich is anything to go by. Long story short, we've had 7 generations with these things, and it's about what you would expect. We want to produce something akin to the American mammoth jackstock donkey, and we want to increase that thing's milk output. Donkey milk, you see, was already quite common in Rome. Believe it or not, they loved the stuff, literally bathed in it. They thought there was serious medicinal value to it and used it for infants, as it is apparently extremely similar to human milk, some of the most similar out there, very easy to digest. And so we have bred a donkey that can produce up to 2 gallons a day, is no less than 15 hands tall, and is primarily used by the agri-legions as a dual-purpose animal that both helps carry things around and feeds the many orphans they are taking in at all times. Horses, on the other hand, are going the destrier route. While we certainly are also breeding for milk lines, breeding a variety of mare that can produce up to 6 gallons a day, we're mostly looking to breed a bigger, stronger, harder, faster, better warhorse. Warhorses in Trajan's time maybe got as much as 16 hands tall, and those were considered heavy warhorses for the cataphractarii. With the power of artificial insemination and a history of caring for horses and identifying various different genes, we have produced a class of horses that stands over 18 hands tall on average, able to absolutely be covered head to toe in silk camo bulletproofing over Bessemer steel plates, kick a man to death with a single blow, provide cover to a rider hanging over the side, hold all manner of gear alongside their human master, and move up to 35 miles a day. We're not going to lie to all of you. Like the cattle, this isn't a terribly impressive set of metrics for the modern-day horse, but it is phenomenal for what the Romans had, and if nothing else, the milk total per year is starting to get pretty insane now that even the burden animals are being bred for longer and more plentiful lactation periods. We are going to end up milking every single animal that it's even remotely feasible to do so with. Nobody gets away with not drinking their milk. We're gonna have the strongest bones in the entire goddamn universe. The largest antelope in the world, the western greater eland, will have been part of the Roman Empire since 103 CE at least. The males of this species can reach well over a ton in mass and can stand up to 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Docile by nature and generally social, these herd animals are already being domesticated in the modern day due to their general utility over cattle in harsh environments, yummy flavor, and the fact that their milk, if stored correctly, can stay at room temperature for literal months without spoiling. They can eat coarse grasses, some of which might even be fatal to cattle, and are immune to many diseases that cattle get in hotter climates. Though we've only had a short 7 generations with them, real-life domestication attempts have found them to be extremely easy, as the greater eland, much like the capybara, seems to have considerably greater capabilities than ambitions. Though they can standing high jump over the head of an average human and can run over 40 miles an hour, they're not terribly flighty, as even one full-sized bull can gore much of a lion pride to death before succumbing. The last 7 generations of breeding has brought the standing high jump of these springy giants up to over 8 feet, their overall mass to an average of around 3,000 pounds, and a milk output of roughly 3.5 gallons a day. Popular for cavalrymen down in the deserts of Africa and the Middle East, the greater eland is becoming a mainstay in many caravans that travel through arid climates. And at the very least, it doesn't bite or gore people anymore. Much. So we're gonna put out some pretty hard-hitting facts here. We hope you're sitting down for this. Rome had access to bears. We know, shocking shit. We told you to sit down for that for a reason, just saying. We might be used to thinking about the Romans using lions and tigers and elephants in their colosseums for spectacle, but bears were also a main feature in all of these arenas, as bears were all over Europe and even select parts of North Africa and Middle East at the time. There's even historical evidence to support the Roman possession of polar bears. Polar bears, brown bears, Asiatic bears, and black bears can all interbreed to produce fertile offspring, and all of them have their own special abilities and benefits, just like ravens and crows. So, we're gonna start using artificial insemination to produce Ursa imperialis, a hybrid of polar bears, brown bears, black bears, and Asiatic bears. Though we've only had 6 generations with these hilarious hybrids, that's just enough to get away with the belly of a fact. More importantly, bears are very intelligent, moderately social when they want to be, are highly dexterous, can be highly affectionate to humans, and love beer. They love it. A lot of zoologists consider bears, as a matter of fact, to be considerably smarter than dogs. Yes, we're going to uplift this 1-ton hybrid vigor-fueled monstrosity. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to make these into people. Button boards are easy enough, and bears are already highly trainable, but through extremely specific selection processes and a tiered system that slow boats the less exceptional specimens through more generations of domestication before their most successful descendants are braided back into the elite population again, we have been able to start punching out extremely specific demands of this new species of hybrid megabear. Like with cravens, the incorporation of 4 different species together, which can all produce fertile offspring with one another, has produced a literal 2,000-pound death machine that nevertheless moves with remarkable speed and grace. In fact, through careful selection, we've managed to breed bears with a slightly higher range of motion in their forelimbs and a deeper pelvic shelf, allowing for more comfortable upright walking. Though these bears don't walk upright all the time, they do walk upright about 40% of the time, and are able to carry heavy objects Wojtek style for their human handlers. While bears aren't exactly a social species, and they are legitimately one of the most dangerous things outside of the bulk of Africa that walks on 4 legs, they have shown themselves to be remarkably easy to handle in the right circumstances throughout history, and their amazing intelligence allows them to catch on to things quickly and make surprisingly good companions when treated with the proper respect and caution. On top of that, bears seem to be generally decent people, not anthropomorphizing them here either. There are countless instances of very real wilderness footage online of bears in general being sort of just cool dudes. They leave people alone when they can. They try not to be too aggressive unless they feel they need to be. They are more curious than they are hostile, and they often try to fix things in their environment that they see are noticeably wrong. Not because they understand necessarily why it's wrong, but when a bear walking down the road puts a traffic cone upright, it's doing so because it knows the traffic cone is supposed to be upright. And it's not going to be that asshole that passes a problem and doesn't spend a little energy to fix it as it goes by. They're just sorta amenable dudes all around whenever they think they have the option. And to really lay it on thick here and make it personal, we have met in person multiple bear trainers and their bears in real life. Most of them, though entirely unrelated to each other and having never met each other to our knowledge, all agree with this assertion that bears, by and large, are just sort of chill dudes who try to be decent if they think the option is available to them. More than that, we've personally been in proximity with bears in the wild. Perhaps more terrifyingly still, we were leaping distance from a mother bear and her babies. And yet, at the end of the encounter, all she wanted was some fish. We tossed her one of the nearby carcasses of the ongoing salmon run, and she grabbed it, handed it off to one of her two babies, looked back at us for a long few seconds, and then wandered off into the woods. No malice there, though perhaps a touch of thankfulness, and so much understanding in those eyes. By the gods, we've seen humans with way less going on behind their eyes than Mama Bear had going on then. One way or the other, we're getting these bears' personhood. Maybe not now, but certainly eventually. And in the meantime, they serve many useful purposes to the Roman state. The American bison and European wisent both lived in far greater numbers during the early 2nd century. Not only that, the two species can produce fertile offspring quite easily. The American bison is a heavy grass-consuming plains grazer, while the European wisent is a diverse, dieted forest browser. Together, they come together to make the Roman bison, a chonky bastard that more or less stands in as a decent halfway point between their two parent species. Despite only 5 generations of breeding after hybridization, bison are confirmed to be rideable and easily herded if raised from infants. Despite being always angry, they do well in domestic circumstances. And despite being exceedingly grumpy, they are still highly social animals who protect their young as a group, display affection to their fellows, and congregate in the thousands. So you better believe that we'll be domesticating these giant bastards to make an all-purpose hauling, pulling, and riding animal that gets up to 3,500 pounds on average and produces up to 3 gallons of milk a day during an elongated lactation period. And this is fairly impressive when considering the modern bison. Bison milk isn't an active industry in our timeline, and the largest wild bull was measured at only 2,800 pounds, while a captive bred got up to 3,800 pounds. This means our average bison are pushing into the maximum potential size range of even privately owned bison bodies in the modern day, while still producing a secondary product that can feed the average Roman and elongate the functional working life of these gigantic bovines. Alright, so you probably didn't think of this when we came out here. The giraffe is notoriously one of the least remembered of the big players on the African savanna, so much so that it has nearly gone extinct in several areas because of lack of attention to poaching in preference to more popular animals like lions, elephants, and hippos. Which is a crying shame because giraffes are not only really cool, but quite docile and carefree even in nature. They take well to handling and don't see humans as a threat due to our tiny comparable size. Some giraffes, even in the wild, have been recorded nuzzling and licking human photographers just because they seem to think we're cute. Giraffes also live lives almost entirely upright, giving them untold endurance compared to many other quadrupeds. Their long legs give them huge, incredibly efficient strides that can carry their bodies great distances in very short periods of time. Able to reach speeds of as high as nearly 40 miles an hour for a mile or two before needing to stop, they can maintain a steady amble at around 10 miles an hour basically all day. And just the giraffe's neck alone is strong enough to support the weight of a Roman several times over, thanks to honed neck muscles evolved for holding over 600 pounds of mass together in an attack motion called necking. These necking blows can knock other giraffes over outright if they score properly, functionally right up there with the kick of a Clydesdale in the amount of force that it puts out. Cooler still, giraffes generally seek equal competition in necking duels, preferring to square up against other giraffes of similar size and avoiding smaller or larger foes in general. They will consistently measure themselves against each other before fighting, allowing their opponents to recover and get back into position before continuing if knocked over, and even adjusting their position relative to each other to make sure that both combatants are as comfortable as they can be with the situation before officially beginning the fight. In short, wild giraffes are, naturally, fair and just animals. And best of all, Romans loved giraffes. As with so many African beasts, they valued the spectacle of this weird camel leopard. Caesar brought one back from Egypt a century and a half ago, and they were just taken by the things. Since then, giraffes had become a regular part of Roman entertainment, and there was already a pre-existing infrastructure to bring them to Europe, making it easy for the domestication programs to begin. Now, only getting into Generation 6 as of 125 CE, we haven't been able to make much change to the giraffe. However, we've caused enough change to make a difference to the average human. With flatter, broader backs and stronger legs, the imperial giraffes are able to be ridden by humans and can move at the full 40 miles an hour for up to 5 miles before needing to stop. Their 10-mile-an-hour trot has been moved up to roughly 15 miles an hour at near indefinite duration, and they've gotten a bit taller, reaching up to 20 feet on average. Their necks are much wider and stronger now as well, strong enough for a human to put a flexible ladder on them and climb up for a vantage point in mixed terrain, and those ladders are anchored to their much larger ossicones, able to be held onto by their handlers while up at the heads of the beasts. Since they already are quite docile in nature, it has been easy to get them to become affectionate to humans, and otherwise take to being ridden as mounts in the savannah alongside the eland cavalry. But they're also remarkably stupid, and still somewhat flighty from the deeply ingrained instincts of their ancestors. So, special etiquette must be observed when handling the giraffe, lest it lash out just like any horse might. However, this is not seen as a particularly special thing. Romans were already masters of pastoral agriculture, lover of horses and cattle, capturers and tamers of wild animals, and perhaps most important of all, fervent chronicles of utilitarian information about everything from dog training to cooking. So it does not take long for the giraffe to not only gain mainstream acceptance as a high-functioning military scout mount, but it becomes the darling of the legions as a whole, who joke regularly about how stupid and lovable their giraffe mounts are, how silly they are when they drink or sleep, how wild and hilarious their tongues are, and how very suited to civilization these things happen to be. Though it is still very unwise to ride them into cities, where they will flail and lash out at the loud, crowded conditions, many soldiers believe that a giraffe ride over the rolling grasslands of North Africa is one of the most relaxing, freeing things in the world. Alright, so we're not quite done yet, but we're gonna warn everyone that the game, it changes here. As you might have noticed, the giraffe is only getting into its 6th generation. Bison only had 5 generations under the domestication umbrella. With this, we officially fall under the required generation time of the Belyaev effect. Moreover, the animals we'll be focusing on here are not merely intelligent. They are some of the most intelligent, social, and long-lived species we know about today. We're not even trying to domesticate them in the practical colloquial sense, because it's simply impossible. Obviously, we'll use artificial insemination and aggressive selection measures, but we are not making these animals into our pets, our companions, our service animals, or our war mounts. That sort of domestication is simply not possible in this context, as most of these animals have only had a mere 2 generations since our arrival. So long do they take to mature, and so smart are they that it takes that long for their brains to start going full speed. These animals, from the very beginning, are to be considered people from step 1. They only need the human help to establish their personhood and enter into pre-sapience. So let's talk about the easiest ones. The US Navy already has the Marine Mammal Program. They've also come out and publicly stated that most of the sea lions used in that military program are wild. They're not domesticated sea lions and dolphins. They're wild animals that have been attracted by tricks, treats, and reward schemes that overwhelmingly stimulate and enrich their minds, and thus constantly incentivize them to return and continue doing what their handlers want them to do. They're literally doing the job because they're friends. How do they do this so consistently? Video games. No, this is not a joke. Go look up YouTube videos about the US Marine Mammal Program. They're very, very, very open about it. After being lured in by entertainment, human handlers and animal psychologists can work with them on their own terms to start training them to perform special actions like attaching float cuffs to unmarked intruders in their home waters. Since the sea lions have specific spots that they have enrichment set up for them, they get protective of the territories they are given, and are inclined to perform better not only for treats and rewards, but also for the safety of the territory, which gives them far more mental stimulation than they'd otherwise get out in the wild. We don't have video games, sadly. But the Romans had all manner of silly mechanisms and engineering tricks to make items that could offer similar situations until we do have video games. Simple color and shape matching programs and games like Pong are consistently more than enough to keep a sea lion coming back for more, so we can set up analog tests that reproduce similar effects. Handlers set up modular rotating block toys that attach to mechanisms that release food when a certain order of colors and shapes are lined up in a specific order. And mazes with little grooves big enough for a sea lion nose to stick through can be offered with balls in them that give food when the ball gets to the end, facilitated by falling into a divot that has a button at the bottom or something. And of course, the sea lions can come and go as they please. Nobody keeps them here. They simply keep coming back most of the time because it's much better to live under human supervision with treats and enrichment than out in the open wild. And of course, artificial insemination to breed the smartest and most person-like sea lions down. This is literally only 6 generations in, at most, by 125 CE, so don't worry about that too much for now. At least they get button birds to talk to people if they want. So, not sure if you know, but giant river otters are literally as long as people are tall, can get up to 100 pounds in extreme instances, roll around in mobs up to 24 members large, and cannot be stopped. You think of otters and you think of adorable, playful, fluffy, hand-holding cuties out on the ocean blue. This is not them. Giant river otters from South America are some of the most absolutely unhinged psychopaths that nature has ever spit out, right up there with the hummingbird and the honey badger. They regularly bully caiman, anacondas, and even jaguars right out of their territories or outright out of existence. However, they're also amazingly smart, have many vocalizations, can be extremely playful and friendly to humans when they want to be, and have been used by indigenous populations to help with fishing for thousands of years by the modern day. It is entirely possible that there are indeed some South American otter fishing traditions already present when the Romans arrive, but even if there aren't, the fact of the matter remains that we have evidence of the practice as early as just the 6th century, so we're not that far before the advent of the practice. Otters, simply put, are prime choices for uplift. Slowly but surely, we'll make them more social, more intelligent, have larger vocabularies on the button boards, and less fucking crackheady. I mean, look at that face. Do you think that face has human feelings? And then again, it might. Look at that face. Ugh. From here on out, we get 2-3 generations. Tops. The animals you see henceforth are so long-lived that you can expect no physical changes to them due to domestication by 125 CE. They will merely be slightly stronger, slightly larger, slightly longer-lived, etc. The most you'll see them improve from our hand directly is to gain a higher amount of anatomical symmetry, a lower frequency of deleterious genetic conditions, and other simple things like that. Most of the progress you'll see will not be from genetic progress, but from near unlimited nutrition, better healthcare, and other such societal factors that have made humans live longer and healthier lives in our own world and timeline. The focus on these animals is not anatomical change, but societal and intellectual progress. They are taught to use button boards essentially from birth, selected for impulse control and empathy, given endless patience and forgiveness in their foibles, and talked to like people whenever possible. And they are as follows: the chimp, the bonobo, the capuchin, the spider monkey, and the gorilla. These critters stand out at the tippy top of their respective classes. Gorillas, bonobos, and chimps are obvious choices for uplift, naturally. And before you try to start typing fast in the comments, yes, apes are monkeys. All apes are a subset of old world monkeys, and since the law of monophyla states that you can't outgrow your ancestry, all apes are still, therefore, monkeys, including you. You, a human, are a monkey. You're a dry-nosed, tailless, old-world monkey. Change our mind. Capuchins and spider monkeys are the most intelligent of the New World monkeys, and there's no reason to hold them back if we're working on the 6-foot-long noodle nightmares from the same damn continent. Just seems unkind to keep them out of it when they have so much potential and adorable little hands. Unlike many of the previous entries, we should never assume that these animals are allowed to take part in war, in primary civil actions, and really anything important or civilized, honestly. They are barely initiated into pre-sapience, and at this point, we need to keep them secret and keep them safe, as Gandalf says. Huge agri-legion-run agroforests are set aside for their specific cultivation and training. Flourishing food forests where they can live comfortably and free from threats of violence or starvation, wherein human handlers can wander behind their groups and tempt them with treats, enrichment, tests, and sometimes even direct company in the form of child caretakers. A reminder that multiple primatologists following gorillas for extended periods of time have just had gorilla mothers drop babies in their laps, as seen with Dian Fossey when she was studying gorillas. In fact, her connection to the gorillas she was studying became so close that her subjects would come and sit next to her, pet her hair, and let their children play with her. Gorillas also practice allomothering, wherein higher-ranking females will sometimes foist their children off to lower-ranking females to practice parenting, which primatology researchers have been repeatedly labeled as in our own history, those lower-ranking females. We also see very similar behavioral traits in all of the above subjects. Using tried-and-true social mechanisms to habituate and integrate in with wild primate and monkey troops, the agri-legions have been slowly able to start separating and selecting for the most adaptive, mentally flexible, socially intelligent, and empathic members of these species. Button boards are presented whenever possible to the most docile of them, rather than rudimentary sign language, as humans have been trying to use with primates for decades in our own timeline, allowing for considerably wider and more diverse standards of communication. And this, though it has only been 2 generations of experimentation and uplift, is already starting to bear fruit in its own small ways. However, patience is the key here. True genetic progress with the monkeys will not be found in any of these species until we are personally long gone, and all that matters is that the Empire stick to the plan. And finally, our magnum opus of domestication, the true beauty of the entire program. We're sorry, we get misty-eyed when we think about them. Let's level with you right now. The second generation of artificially selected elephants is probably only just starting to be born right about 125 CE. We haven't even gotten a full 2 generations, more like 1+. But we cannot stress enough how important this is. The infrastructure for elephant domestication was already there in the Roman Empire, with elephants being seen in history from Egypt to Britannia during the first 2 centuries of the Common Era. Elephants take time to make progress on. They live as long as humans, and they're, well, we can just look at them. However, elephants were known, even at the time, to have great intelligence, strong family bonds, timeless memory, excellent problem-solving skills, boundless compassion and empathy, amazing trainability, deep emotions, and even complex ritual behaviors and rudimentary pharmacology. They mourn and grieve their dead, seek vengeance on those who have wronged them, call out for help when in need, have names for each other, and maintain social traditions that differ from herd to herd, family to family. They mine salt. They like music, and have music preferences that differ from herd to herd and between various age ranges. And they love piano. They even seem to have prayer. Not only did Pliny the Elder, died just 40 years ago by this scenario's current time, record the moon gazing and waving branches at reflections of the moon in what seems a reverent or at least ritualistic fashion, but modern elephant behavioral specialists are starting to come around to Pliny's side of things. It might well be that elephants have religion. As far as we're concerned, that makes them people already. No joke, real stuff. These guys literally pray to the moon. Looks like people stuff to us for real. So, while the artificial selection we are able to exercise on elephant kind has almost certainly helped them muddy out a few dangerous recessive genes throughout much of their population, we're mostly concerned with enriching and nurturing the personhood already present in the elephants of the old world. From the very beginning, we bought out all of the elephants that we could throughout the entirety of the empire, taking them out of circulation as spectacle animals bound for the slaughter of the arena, and putting them in vast reserves, where we have specially trained musicians to soothe the broken hearts and minds of the formerly war and show animals we've done our best to rehabilitate. Not only do these reserves nurture the elephants, but also other domestication experiments of both plants and animals, giving the beasts more than enough food and a sense of continuity with the rest of the environment. Here, on their reserves, they have peaceable lives, surrounded by placid animals and being tended to by humans who play calming tunes for them, and feeding them whatever they like. And laws are already being passed to eliminate elephants from war and entertainment roles entirely, bringing ever more specimens to these breeding programs to live much more comfortable lives alongside agri-legionnaire researchers who do everything they can to give these elephants every reason to cooperate. When they want something, they can wander over to any number of button boards and press what words they want with their trunks, a practice they're getting better at every day. And they are big enough to actually carry around these button boards and their batteries in public and talk to people in reasonably coherent phrases, giving them a sense of low personhood even in the public eye long before other animals that must rely on technological assistance to speak human words. And if they don't, that's fine. They can wander about and do what they so desire like any free people may. They are no longer our slaves. Like with the monkeys, this is a slow, generational process that we will personally never see come to fruition. But it will come to fruition eventually. And when it does, the Roman Empire will have people who weigh several tons, have giant trunks, and never forget. And now that we've crushed 44 pages of script on just the standouts of the animals of the Roman Empire as of 125 CE, and remembering that we doubtless have thousands of other animals in one stage of domestication or another, we want to step back from things for a bit. We've been looking at all of this with a very fine-toothed comb so far. We've got milk totals, generation counts, egg tallies, spoken vocabulary inventories, oxytocin loops, and silk production sums. That's all well and good, but what does it actually look like? If we look at it from the perspective of the viewer here in the video, it all sounds quite clinical and clean, organized and easy. But we assure you that the day-to-day life of the average Roman at this point in 125C is far more complex. The agri-legion composes perhaps as much as half of the population of the Roman Empire at this point. That is not to say that half of all adults are working as agri-legionnaires, though that number gets larger by percentage every year. Rather, it indicates that the empire, now over 250 million people strong and stretching from the Great Plains of North America to the fertile fields of Ukraine, from the frigid reaches of Greenland to the arid deserts of the Namib, perhaps have 150 million children or more currently living within its borders. And most of those children are, at 10 years old, enrolled in the agri-legions by their parents in an effort to give them a better life. Many of those parents were orphans that grew up in the agri-legions themselves, rescued from lives of squalor and sex slavery, and feel a generational attachment to the institution in much the same way that American military families feel indebted to their nation for giving them the opportunities that it has. And quite a few of those children were probably born into the agri-legions, the children of agri-legionnaires who met each other under contract and fell in love while working with each other. Freed from the social and legal stigma behind getting married and having children while being soldiers and agri-legionnaires, these kids are actually raised into the military structure of both the legions themselves and the agri-legions that made all of this possible. And as mentioned in episode 2, even little hands can plant trees, water bushes, mind seedlings, pick berries, harvest vegetables, milk goats, gather eggs, and otherwise pull all that good farm kid stuff that's honestly the standard of everyday life in most of history for the bulk of humanity until, like, the mid-1900s. Nothing we wouldn't have our own kid doing on the farm to stay out of trouble and help around the house. You might moan and hem and haw about this, but this is the second fucking century. You'd still tell the kids to go do their chores, to do the dishes, to put their dirty clothes away, etc. These are just very different chores. No more realistically dangerous and at times far more productive. While about 50% of the agri-legions at any given point in time are planting trees and managing the germination of new crops, the other 50% or so are doing literally everything else. From food preservation to domestication experiments, military logistics and civilian transportation, medicine and market delivery, inventory, and invention. Since they have a fairly small workload for the bulk of the day, they spend most of their time either learning or innovating new solutions to all of the updates society is going through. And most of that latter 50% of the agri-legions are also largely stationary. They stay behind to tend to what the planters left for them, mind major community hubs, and regularly train their domesticates in plain view of the public, both to habituate the animals and integrate them into society at large, but also as a bit of spectacle for the common folk, who would be thirsting for their blood sport in the arenas if the streets weren't already full of strange new animals in entirely new shapes and sizes, showing off what they can do for the everyday Joe. So, instead of looking at plants in the same cold, calculating manner as we have with the animals, to enter into the everyday life of a Roman in 125 CE, let's close our eyes and imagine a Roman port town by the name of Leptis Magna, where the very first agri-legionnaires were brought to be raised and trained some 23 years ago. Recently, the city has been updated, and the streets are much wider, full of people wandering around with a dedicated lane for military transport vehicles just in case it's needed. While once the smell of sewage and animal feces was the common scent of the Empire's cities, the streets here are regularly sprayed down with hoses by dedicated sanitation workers, who guide the deluge into covered sewers that eventually empty into the community centrifuges, boilers and separators that fertilize the now flourishing countryside beyond the walls of the community, whose gates are mostly open these days for lack of crime anywhere near the town. The stench of society, however, is replaced with the noise of countless different animals. The Roman Empire and animals were once synonymous, sure, but all of that was spectacle and sensation in select areas built for it. Now, you wander down a main market road and see all manner of animals that you could have never imagined just a couple decades ago, performing tasks formerly assigned to slaves and servants, assistants, and hired help. A gigantic, shaggy corvid with a hooked beak tip squawks at you from a nearby perch to get your attention while its master, a jeweler, minds some other tasks in the background. "Come closer," it beckons. "We have great things for sale. Do you want to buy?" You smile at the bird, shaking your head and moving on. "Come on," it calls out. "I saw you looking at the blue ones." You pause, remembering just how well integrated the Craven is starting to become, just how smart they are. Parrots, you've seen, know more words, but don't have the patience to argue and haggle. Cravens, you have experienced personally, can argue all day even with their more limited vocabulary. If you turn back around without finding a way to first address the proprietor, you'll be babbling with a bird all day like some sort of loon. Best not to chance such things, so you move on. As you near a corner, your own companion rounds it, carrying a 200-pound crate of agricultural goods in his fuzzy forelimbs. You are not an agri-legionnaire, but rather a merchant of standing who regularly works with the agri-legions on transportation business, as though to do otherwise would be even possible in this day and age. Your specialty is seed stock, as Trajan's forest is always sending seeds back to the core for selection and experimental germination before needing you and your shipping company to move the resultant seeds wherever they might be needed. To help facilitate the business relationship, and to endear you to them, the agri-legionnaires have granted you a young imperial bear, a 4-species hybrid that's sharp as a needle and literally a ton of fun when you get him drinking. Though a bit gruff and inclined to push you around in what you're sure he feels is an affectionate manner, he's been a good friend to you the past year, and has never bitten or otherwise harmed you on purpose, and has his own button board with a large battery that you can call upon the Agri-Legion regiment to recharge if needed be. Though, in general, he's a bear of few words, even with technological assistance, preferring to simply sit about in quiet but good company with a jug of cider and a large meal at the end of a long day's work, much like any human might in his situation. You thank him for securing the load and minding the paperwork for the shipments, though you wonder why he's carrying a box of his own, considering that the Agri-Legionnaires should be already moving to load things up in your ship at the docks. What's in the crate, you ask, unable to hide your curiosity. The splotchy-patterned bear with a white chest points a short but dexterous claw over to a nearby fruit stand and you shrug, wandering over and grabbing a pear to shove in your mouth. The attendant merely smiles at you and speaks up as your companion shovels half a watermelon into his gullet in a single fluid motion. Good weather today, she offers commiseratively in English, all the rage throughout the Empire lately, though rigidly enforced as a second language among the aristocrats like yourself, while the common folks seem to adopt it for almost anything convenient. Your partner's working up a hunger. Any special plans? She giggles, petting a nearby cheetah, head wide and jaws in an awkward but endearing smile as it pants next to her in the afternoon sun. A pair of marked cravens land on the stand next to her alongside a large gray parrot, the trio begging for fruit that the attendant dutifully offers before flying off with their food in claw. Just loading up the seed stock for Augusto Dunham, you respond in Latin with a welcoming expression, while a short woman wearing an eagle badge rides up to the stand next to you on an over 12-foot tall bird and gestures at the attendant, who tosses her a big bag of oranges with a grin. We've got 2,000 tons to deliver into the Imperial Cultivaria. You think to address the woman on the Titan bird next to you as your partner devours an entire jackfruit over the course of only a few bites, but the beast wears a sign on its chest that reads, I am an early generation mount. Do not touch me. I bite. Hard. You decide against it, as the only reason anyone would have such an ancestral mount as this would be if they were particularly highly ranked, and the eagle badge itself is the mark of the Cascade Rangers, which means this woman serves the Emperor directly. Not yet even 30 by the looks of her, you have no doubt that she is one of the original orphans that have since joined the ranks of the Emperor's entourage, rather than one of the younger generations of Guardians. Best not to chance it unless directly addressed. As she heads off, the attendant smiles at you again, the bear finally finishing off a second watermelon and dipping his face into a nearby drinking trough to wash the smear off. Messy eater he may be, but nobody has ever accused your partner of remaining dirty for long if he has a choice in the matter. So you're a seminifer. The young woman looks you up and down with a degree of respect at that. Best friend my lot, what are you carrying today? Mostly tree seeds and fruit stones, you admit with a small shrug. The nearby orchards have personally funded 3 new ships for me over the last decade. My latest acquisition is metal hulled. She blushes at the claim, mouth going a bit wide. Metal hulled? For civilian work already? I was told they wouldn't be out until after Luadian and Ethrenia are secured completely, she admits, leaning over to present her rather sizable chest with a smirk. How did a mere seminifer secure such a purchase? You look her up and down briefly, appreciating her assets, but it's become more and more difficult these days to determine how old a girl is. Back in the day, you could pick up any old girl, but nowadays, the young women who merely look of marriageable age are getting more and more common. You're told by your shipwright, a former Agri-Legionnaire herself, that it has to do with increased access to food and medicine, but it's difficult for you to grasp. Perhaps best not take the bait at this time. You've got work to do, after all. I had to pull some strings, certainly, you offer with a shrug, but I've got a long history with your folk already, miss, you give her a knowing smile. I've found the generals are much more interested in bending the rules for someone as consistent a shipping history as I have. With that, you leave her and guide Yvonne, your companion, down the lane toward a canal that leads to the main dockyards. Because of the extensive development here over the last 2 decades, canals have been dug into the land for ease of transport. Normally, a common person would have to walk or use a wagon, but you are a licensed businessman, and using these canals is your main method of travel throughout the town. Instead, the canal allows you and your partner to enjoy the sights and sounds of the carefully crafted microforests the Agri-Legionnaires have cultivated right here within the city limits. Deftly, you reach out and grab a guava straight off the branch as you pass by, confident that doing so will make no difference in the commons. According to statistics spilled off to you earlier just this year by a general of the Agri-Legions, some inhumanly tall man of northerly descent perhaps, the Empire's yearly output of produce alone would be sufficient to feed the entire human population of the Empire 80 times over. The actual numbers involved, he assures you, would be lost on someone of your generation. which felt a bit insulting at the time, but ultimately might as well be true, as the concept of a billion is still a fairly numinous one to you. Allegedly, you handle billions or even trillions of seeds every year, but in the nature of humans abstracting things to avoid the headache, you most often figure it into hundreds of thousands or of tons, rather than individual seeds and sprouts. Yvonne taps you gently on the shoulder and makes a small noise to get your attention, finally opening the crate as the ferryman guides your boat down the canal. Within is a special treat you couldn't have suspected. A picture of purple fruit with a white lavender pulp inside and many little seeds accompanies a great bag of those same seeds, dried and ready for germination in your own greenhouses. The instruction pamphlet agri-legionnaires are so well known for tells you how to get the crop going. Akebi, it is called, all the way from the farthest lands of Yamataya, and something only the most well-connected seminifers get access to in their own personal garden plots. "How did you get this?" you ask your partner, only for him to make a strange, repetitive grunting noise you've long since learned is his version of a chuckle. You'll ask him later in the comfort of your own ship, but for now you'll have to let him keep his secrets. Your journey down the canal to the coastal reservoir is peaceful thereafter, letting you ruminate on what you want to eat for dinner tonight. As you get off the boat, thinking for a moment in front of the great screws that dispense fluid into the aqueducts and take it back inland, you come to the conclusion that the two of you need a trip to the food banks. You briefly consider your ID card, a small sheet of brass with a series of punches on it alongside your identification number and other relevant information. Beneath the hole punches that mark who you are is a series of tiny holes, some plugged and some not. You're told the holes track how much food credit you have, but the system is beyond your understanding, so the actual number of food credit on it at the moment is unknown. But you've been saving up, and friends have been generous lately, so you know you can afford something good tonight for both yourself and your partner as a bit of a self-congratulation for all your hard work. The motion of the people around the Kothon sweeps you slowly through the crowd with your bear friend toward the opposite side of the docks. Once free from the mob of busy shoppers, sailors, fishermen, traders, and animal handlers, you only have to break up a very brief scuffle between Yvonne and a very disrespectful parrot with a larger and more diverse vocabulary even than most of their kind. Then, mercifully, you arrive at the Leptis Magna Dockyard Food Bank. The great building on the water is perhaps as large as a mid-sized arena, but you know all too well that it is for the storing of food and ice, not beasts and spectators. Fishermen come in and sell their harvest to the state alongside grain ships and the like from other parts of the sea. Then the state preserves them on site and stores them for later access. Every Roman, whether citizen or merely subject, is provided a standardized amount by the state each day. 2 eggs, 2 pounds of hybrid flour, 1.3 pounds of meat, just over half a gallon of milk, and a quarter pound of animal fat to grease whatever pans you might be using, all of which are whole steel or copper bottomed, of course. Because of Trajan's great food production and preservation policies, even the poorest of today can eat better than the richest back in your day, and it has made the world a truly more delicious place where people have to worry so much less than they used to. As you enter the bank, your eyes are drawn to the many commons boxes in the lobby, filled with sealed jars of fruit preserves and vegetables, bricks of pemmican, packs of freeze-dried potatoes, bags of fermented milk curd, and all manner of other dried and packaged goods. With wiggling fingers, you reach out and grab a jar of quince and apple jelly, a friendly smile on your face as you cross the spacious interior and reach the desk, behind which a friendly-looking woman with a rabbit badge greets you as you slide the jar into your bag. "Card, please," she asks as you hand the brass thing over. Yvonne reaches into his harness to do the same, but you wave him off dismissively. He's already done the hard work. It's time you spring for the feast. As the woman slides the card into a great machine of metal gears and arms behind her, the mechanical monstrosity clicks and ticks and clatters about as the contraption reads the plugs to figure things out. Then a bunch of little cards flip over the big rails behind her and reveal words and numbers that tell you how much food credit you have on your card specifically. 58 eggs, 23.273 pounds flour, 16.377 gallons milk, 12.225 pounds animal fat, and 6.214 pounds meat. You've been indulging a bit lately on the ground pork, to be fair. Back in your day, pork was considered the highest of meats, and you could only afford it every few months. Nowadays, the new hogs of the Empire are spitting out so many piglets that the common people are getting fat on bacon and loin without even trying. And the aristocrats of yesteryear gladly trade off this now common animal for the delights of new delicacies, like tatanka from the distant plains of Luarien, and of the sweet, forbidden meat of pre-sapient uplifted species like bear, elephant, and sea lion, now considered over 4 times its weight in other meats thanks to the slowly encroaching cultural shift in public mindset toward these much more intelligent animals that you used to regard as only good for spectacle. Then again, the last decade has changed your mind on many things. After all, a bear has just scored you a fine collection of seeds for your private gardens, and that will bring you no small amount of money. This, you know by now, was no mere training, but personal agency. "I'd like to take out 4 gallons of milk, whatever you have the most of," you begin casually. 10 pounds of flour, 2 pounds fat, just the same as the milk, 28 eggs, and... You pause for a moment, considering the situation. It is a special occasion, and without a doubt, Yvonne will repay you for your generosity now with generosity of his own later. "Let's pull out all the meat today," you finish with a smile. The young woman raises her eyebrows with a wry grin. "Setting up a feast or celebrating a special occasion?" "Certainly a special occasion," you tell her with an equally mischievous grin yourself. "Do you have Cappy?" "I'm afraid we've run out," she offers with an apologetic smile. "We have a fresh shipment of moose, though." You don't care for moose, even if Yvonne loves the stuff. It's a bit heavy for you, so you shake your head and think idly about it. "Do you have pork?" you ask out of simplicity, old habits dying hard. "Running a bit low. Would you take half of your order in pork and the other half in something else?" "Titan bird," you suggest. "There was a big cull just last week. We have plenty on ice," she chimes invitingly to your absolute delight. Many people your age think it's strange to eat the beasts from Malagasy, but you find the giant mounts to be quite delicious when ground with other meats like pork and beef. She types in some things on the machine and it clunks and chunks and clicks and ticks yet again before spitting out your card with an entirely new array of plugs and punches that will help the next machine process who you are and what your credit is. As you wander out, you can't help but grab a few jars of soup, sitting down with your partner just outside on a public bench to enjoy the charity of the state, vegetable beef with spicy peppers from the New World to give it a kick throughout the storage process. You know that the jar itself is around 5 years old, but nevertheless, the soup inside is a delight to the senses, even at room temperature. Back in your day, of course, you could have never hoped to preserve something so hearty as this for even a fraction of the time. But now, thanks to the introduction and developments of the agri-legions, this is commonplace throughout the bulk of the imperial core, and has been for nearly 2 decades, with the rest of the empire's farthest-flung provinces having begun to actively benefit from the full societal update over the last few years. As you go back to your ship, a stalwart wooden-framed cargo vessel built around 20 years ago, one of the first of her kind, you feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. You are getting on in years, having seen things go from what they once were to what they are now. More than that, you were part of it, one of the first to jump onto the seed trend and establish yourself as one of the Roman Empire's greatest assets. You've made friends and mended ties with enemies. So flourishing has everything become that people don't feel the need to carry out the same old tired intrigues that they once did. And you've kept abreast with advancements, positioning yourself at the head of the movement you were smart to jump on first. The Empire is full of healthy, laughing children, fruit-bearing trees, and full stomachs as far as the eye can see. Animals you would have once considered mere beasts are now attaining personhood, or being shaped into entirely new forms, used for novel purposes your own father would have never imagined were he here to see them. This area of the great deserts of Ethiopia was tamed decades ago by the first agri-legions, the rest of the sand sea gradually covered up by food forests, fertilized with animal bedding and sanitized human waste. And Arabia, Scandinavia, Germania, and the deepest sections of the Asian steppe are proceeding smoothly on top of that. Lately, you gather, grafting has become so popular that a single tree recently planted on the Capitoline Hill produces 100 different types of fruit. Even the seas themselves are flourishing, with the development of mariculture practices that release 1/10 of their harvest back into the wild to proliferate amongst the waves. Everywhere the Roman Empire extends, trees are planted, flowers bloom, grains ripen, and tubers fatten. To be Roman, in this day and age, is to be healthy and well-fed. All who fall within the Roman Empire's borders are given medicine and the care they need to become strong and useful. And then they are encouraged to sign up for one of the very many new institutions the Emperor has been pioneering for the occupational development of all people he oversees. With the development of new technologies to desalinate water, the Empire has become more of a salt-producing powerhouse than it already was, and drought is a thing of the past, even in the deepest deserts where the rain never reaches. Even those stretches of land have been shrinking as Trajan's forest brings the rain wherever it goes, the water vapor from their leaves visibly producing clouds that are then blown further inland to rain upon the drier lands beyond the reach of the coastal breezes. And though many don't know it consciously, the agralegians have actively cultivated and made commonplace over 5,000 different species of fruit-bearing plant, which now cover the land you once knew as being mostly rolling farm fields and pasture. In just a quarter of a century, the amount of time a single legionnaire serves, the world you know has become entirely different from what it once was. And unlike most great upsets in history, though it was certainly a bit of a rough time getting here, this is good. This is not nearly good enough, as it once was, but just good across all metrics. For the first time in living memory, there's nothing to truly complain about. No major political scandals, no horrific conspiracy against the Empire's well-being, no civil wars, no famine, no plague, no great natural disasters killing thousands in one fell swoop. All of that has been precluded by the wondrous new systems constructed by the Emperor and the glorious new inventions concocted by his head advisor and the team of countless engineers and scientists working under the two of them. With the social guidance of the best emperor and the technological inspiration of the architect of the future, world dominance by the Roman Empire is guaranteed. Eternally.